Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer some of your emails. This first email is from patron KK, who has been a patron since 2020. They ask, how do abusers identify potential victims? What is it that they see in the other person, either consciously or subconsciously, and how do they identify their target? It's a great question. Well, the first thing we have to do is define what we mean by abusers, because the way that the internet talks about abusers is, I think, referring to psychopathic or sadistic abusers, but that's just a small minority of people who will act in habitually or patterned abusive ways. So if we were to break out different types of abusers, different types of people, or different types of personalities that will result in abusive behavior, then we could say, yeah, there's psychopaths, there's sadists. They absolutely can be and often are abusive, unfortunately, but these are rare individuals. You also have abusive people who abuse based on insecure attachment. They are terrified of losing their attachments. They assume that attachments will leave them or harm them, and they learned from their family of origin, or they just came up with the solution themselves that in order to protect themselves from harm and from abandonment, they have to dominate and abuse and control. There's also people with personality disorders or who are on the spectrum of various different personality disorders that will abuse. Narcissistic people, histrionic people, borderline people, paranoid people, obsessive compulsive personality disorder people. There's also cultural socialization that can be a factor. You know, you could have someone who doesn't have a personality disorder and doesn't have particularly insecure attachment, they're not psychopathic, they're not sadistic, but they live in a cultural pocket or maybe even a large culture that tells them, maybe men, for example, that in order to be a good man or a good person in the eyes of God or something, they have to dominate and control their spouse. So there's a lot of different roads to being abusive. And with each of these types of abusers, there is going to be a different type of target that they are going to look for. Like with someone who is narcissistic, they might seek someone who has low self-esteem and doesn't take up a lot of space. Or someone that is borderline might seek someone who is very compliant, or might have tendencies towards abandonment, because there's also projective identification, which is a whole other thing that I won't go into right now. But if we use the theme of dominance as being a through line with abusive individuals, and again, we're talking about a wide variety of people. There are really nice individuals, people with fairly secure attachment who can be abusive. I've had people in my office who I identified as being abusive later on. I might be treating a couple for a couple years, and I really like the couple. They work really hard. They support each other in a lot of ways. They have a lot of wonderful qualities. And yet, I will find that they will engage in abusive behavior. Not as a conscious thing, they don't wake up in the morning like a psychopath or a sadist and say, I'm going to abuse this person, but they will accidentally, in a sense, or react and then justify it in their mind. So, there's that. But anecdotally, and research can demonstrate this, that, the average abusive individual is dominant and wants to dominate their partners. If we're talking about intimate partner violence, intimate partner abuse. So you have this theme of dominance and wanting to dominate. Again, either because they're a psychopath and they just want to prey on people, but much more likely it's because they want to dominate because they believe that they are going to experience attachment harm or abuse if they don't dominate and don't control. And so if I lump all of those people together and think about that theme of dominance, then the types of people that they're looking for are, simply put, people who they can dominate, right? So what does that mean? Well, to everyone, that's going to mean something different, but some things that I can think of off the top of my head that I jotted down here are, if you're a good listener, and this sounds kind of funny, and there's two types of good listeners. There's good listeners who are listening because they feel like they have to, passive people or people who have low self-esteem or they don't have a connection with the self. These folks can be quote unquote good listeners because they don't take up space and they just defer to other people. But you can also be a good listener and have that come from a healthy place because you've been given enough love and attention and attunement and possibly privilege such that you can give back. A lot of therapists are like this, where they were raised well enough and they've healed enough through their own therapy and their own work that they have room at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day, you know what I mean, metaphorically at the end of the day, they have room to listen. If you're not being heard, it's hard to listen unless you have deferred to other people. You know what I mean? So there's two types of good listeners, and both types are susceptible or are potentially targeted by abusive people. Now, for the healthy good listeners, they are more likely to detect when they are beginning the slippery slope into an ongoing abusive relationship, and thus will pull out of that nosedive. Not always, of course, but for the people who are listening out of a default setting, then those people might not even know that they're going down that road. They might even believe they deserve to be harmed. So a good listener is one thing. Also, passive people who don't really have a lot of external, or they don't communicate and or even know preferences that they have, right? So they are just naturally attractive to a dominant person because the dominant, as you're dating or getting to know each other, then, there'll be these little moves that the abusive people in general, like I'm saying, will exert. It might be like you're deciding on what restaurant to go to. And that's not a great example, though, because you can certainly be passive and an easy victim or someone who is targeted by abusive people and yet have very firm opinions about which restaurant to go to. So I'm not saying that it's just hard to generalize about this sort of thing. But anyway, so just generally passive people, non-assertive people, dependent people who are overly dependent on others and believe that they're incompetent. This is actually a real frequent profile of someone who is targeted by abusive people because they fit very well together in the beginning. Also, compliant people are probably more likely to be targeted by abusive people. People who are easygoing. Again, there's a lot of different types of easygoing. There's easygoing like you are just that way, but you're healthy and secure and you're in connection with yourself. There's also people who look easygoing, but they're only that way because they feel like they have to or they don't know what they want. Also, people with less social power are more likely to be targeted. This we know from the data. People with less power regarding race and ethnicity, regarding money and prestige and education. Women have less power in our society, and so they are more likely to be targeted. So an abusive person, a younger person, right? This is why we've developed the really stupid heuristic that if you have an older man and a younger woman, like you have a 45-year-old man and a 30-year-old woman in a relationship, there's this automatic assumption that it's abusive. It's a flag, but it by no means, according to the research, according to empirical data, indicates that abuse or exploitation is happening. But that's one of the reasons why we have that heuristic, is because it's particularly traditionally. Maybe that's part of it. I don't know if I'd really incorporated that. Like, rewind the clock 20, 30 years, and I'm wondering if larger age gaps were much more associated with exploitation. I mean, at least anecdotally, that makes sense to me. Anyway, and I've been talking about connection with the self. Those folks who have a lesser connection with the self, usually in my field, we call this a lack of self. They'll just say a lack of self. But I don't like that phrase because they have a self, they just don't have a connection with it. And when we phrase it lack of self, it actually is really harmful to people who lack a connection with the self because they believe they don't have a self. Like people higher on the spectrum of personality disorders, borderline, histrionic, narcissism, and others, one of their deepest fears is that they don't have an inside life. They don't have a core to who they are. And when they are made to face themselves internally, they'll often describe the deepest, most horrific terror they've ever felt, and they're looking into an abyss. They think that they're empty or they're broken or something, and that's just simply is not the case. They have emotions, they have needs, they have wants, but they've just never been given it. We wouldn't look to, anyway, point is that for folks who lack a connection with the self because they were abused and not attuned to enough growing up, then these individuals have less of a connection with their emotional reactivity. They have less of a connection to their rights. They have less of a connection to their impulses and what they want. And it leads to two things. One is as they're being abused or they're being, beginning to be abused in the beginning of a relationship, they don't feel the injustice or the anger or the sadness immediately. They might have a general sense of sadness and injustice that they're feeling, but they don't connect it with the way they're being treated because they're not in connection with the self. They don't know what's going on with themselves well enough. The other thing is that people who lack a connection with the self can sometimes, as a way of running away from the abyss that they believe is there, is that they will look to a strong personality, someone who will define who they are, will tell them who they are, tell them what they want, because it's better than not having any direction. It can be very upsetting for these folks who lack a connection with the self to face what they believe is this reality that they just don't really exist and they don't have any needs, they don't have any wants. It's a very frightening existence. You'd much rather have, if you believe that you can't generate that from within, then it'd be nice if someone defined that for you. And, it's handing over a lot. Now, you can, as someone who lacks a connection with the self, you can involve yourself with a healthy person who can help you in a flexible way define or search for who you are, or you can match up with an abusive person that will sniff you out and say, "Oh my God, you're perfect for me," because, subconsciously or consciously, because you don't have any sense of who you are or what you want. So I can define everything. I have full reign over not only what you do, but what you believe, what you feel. I can even influence that. I can dominate that. I can control that. Like that's an abusive person's dream, right? And so how do abusive people detect this? Well, we're talking about, it's possible that we're literally talking about 500 million people, maybe 1 billion people on the planet, a large group of people. We're not going to be able to generalize. So you just have to imagine in each of these circumstances that I've been highlighting, and there are many more, that for an abusive person, again, mostly subconsciously, they're looking to fall in love. And how do we generate that feeling? Well, it has to do with a lot of different factors, one of which, in all likelihood, has to do with being able to feel, as an abusive person, they would feel like safe, essentially, is the way I'd put it. As they can dominate, those little indicators in the beginning of a relationship. Like the opposite, if they match up with an assertive person who is in connection with the self and doesn't appreciate being dominated early in the relationship, even in small ways, the abusive person, the typical abusive person, and I'm talking about someone with attachment insecurity and or personality disorder, and they don't wake up in the morning and say, "I want to abuse someone." It just emerges out of their reactivity. For those folks, they will just have a sense of, "I don't feel safe in this relationship because I don't have enough ability to dominate." That won't be a conscious thought in their mind. They might attach a way of framing it like, she's one of those progressive types. She's probably one of those feminists or something. I don't know. Or he's not a family man. He doesn't understand the value of family or something. That's not really what's happening, but that's the way that they're framing it. So it really varies. And maybe for you, patron, why you even asked this question is if you have been abused in the past, because what'll happen to a lot of victims is they will experience chronic victimization, and they will emerge out of an abusive relationship and say, okay, reset. I've learned my mistake. Don't start dating, and particularly don't commit to someone who is abusive. And then you do everything you can, and then 2 years down the line, you find yourself in an abusive relationship again. And then, you go through all the years of recovery and trying to extract yourself. You finally get out of okay, I've done it twice. I'm never going to do it again. And, this has to do with also with the way our parents were often victims, and abusive people grew up in abusive families where one of the parents was abusive and the other was being victimized. And so we have this template of what love is supposed to look like, some of which is healthy and some of which is not. And it's hard to sift through those things, particularly subconsciously. But anyway, for people who are saying to themselves, okay, what is it? Because when I hang out, when I'm dating or I go to a party or something, how come the abusive person is always approaching me and my friends are meeting these other people who aren't abusive? Why is it happening what am I doing? Right? Again, case by case, it's complicated. And if one were to heal from whatever issue it is, attachment insecurity, if you lack a connection with the self, the more of a connection with yourself you're going to have, the better able one would be to detect and avoid and maybe not even attract an abusive person. If you have insecure attachment, healing from that, again, will likely lead to less attractiveness to someone who wants to dominate, and will make it so that you will signal different things subconsciously to the abusive potential people that will cause them to be repulsed by you. But, these are all generalizations. So that's my answer to that question. Let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. Let's do an OPP, an old patron praise. These folks became a patron all the way back in 2017, 7 years ago, and have stayed a patron. That's the key. These are also upper tier, middle tier, upper tier patrons. We have Lemon Jelly from Moscow, Idaho. We have good old Alexis from San Francisco. I met her at a live event. Denisa from Florida. I'm pretty sure I've emailed with you. Brandy from Carnation, Washington, which is close to where I grew up. Sarah from Germany. Mimi from Oklahoma. Amanda from God knows where. Brian from Emeryville, California. Laura from Seattle, Washington. Good old Seattle. And good old Serenity from Modesto, California. I met Serenity as well at a live event. It's really great to see your names there. And thank you so much for becoming a patron and staying a patron all of this time. All right, next email is from middle tier patron and YouTube member Cassie from Europe. She says, a friend that was pretty special to me had recently broken my heart. A friend that was pretty special to me has recently broken my heart. I always thought our relationship was good, even though she is generally a bad texter. I always thought our relationship was good, even though she's generally a bad texter. However, after a video chat last year, she went for months without replying to my messages, which left me pretty anxious. She went for months without replying to my messages, which left me pretty anxious. Yeah. After she left 2 of my messages on read, I confronted her about this, there was an indication. I think iPhones do this because I have Android, and I don't think we have that capability unless it's to Android. Anyway, I don't know. I don't like that feature, honestly. If I get an email or a text, I'm not going to ghost people or be a dick about it. But what if I'm, super busy and I happen to see the text or the email and I don't have time to reply for a few days, and it's legit. Well, it could look like I'm just avoiding or rejecting or something, like I would imagine if I had that, because I think these, when two iPhones are talking to each other, if I had that, I think I would not ever want to look at my texts unless I knew that I had a good hour to dedicate to replying right away. Anyway, she says, Cassie says, after my friend left 2 of my messages on read, I confronted her about this. Okay, she went for months without replying to my messages. After she left 2 of my messages on read, I confronted her about this. She just said that maybe we shouldn't chat with each other. And whilst we are good as friends, it's not good for either of us to keep messaging with each other. And this left me quite brokenhearted. Okay, so she wasn't replying to your texts. You confronted her about this. There's a lot of, variance there. What was that confrontation like? Was that you attacking her? I'm guessing not, but who knows? Or were you just like, hey, I just feel a little hurt that you haven't replied, or what's going on? But anyway, as a result of this confrontation, she says, maybe we shouldn't chat with each other. And even though we're still good as friends, it's not good for either of us to keep messaging. So it sounds like this friend is saying, look, let's hang out, but let's not be a frequent back and forth texter. And, I respect that. I have friends that I have just learned that, because I'm not I think I'm one of those people that tends to reply to texts and engage, have a little back and forth. I might not hear from someone for months, and if they text me like, oh, this reminded me of our time and blah, 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 and I'd be like, oh yeah, and then, have a little back and forth. I don't just drop the ball. But some people are, and they're not bad people. They're just not oriented that way, And for those of you that know Bob, he's kind of like that. He just is kind of a Luddite and just doesn't really like the internet or technology or phones or anything. So, which I totally get. If I were to call Bob, he would answer and we would talk for a long time. So, it's just different strokes for different folks going on. So it sounds like the friend is saying that. She's like, maybe this tech, I'm not really a reply person. Seems to kind of piss you off. I still want you as a friend. So let's maybe just stay friends, meaning we hang out or call each other, but we're not like daily. Like I guess I am somewhere on the spectrum, because I had a friend years ago who was that kind of frequent texter, like every day, all day long. And I'm just not oriented that way, and it felt laborious to me at times. And I think I bothered them by not replying right, because sometimes I could reply, but it just felt like I would be, I would be eclipsing other things in my day that I needed to do, and it would sort of pull me out of whatever I was involved in. I just thought, like, I don't feel like I want to be just in a constant back and forth 7 days a week. But, some people are into that. And so you just have to understand that everyone has their own preference. Anyway, going on, Cassie, I sent 2 messages afterwards confessing some of my feelings. Okay. So you confront your friend says, maybe we shouldn't be chatting, which I find to be, if I'm reading it right, this is pretty healthy communication, maybe from both of you. Instead of being passive about this whole thing, there's this overt conversation about how often texting is going to happen. And okay, you say, Cassie, that you were quite brokenhearted. Okay. It really just depends on what your friend was saying to you. It's possible your friend was saying, look, I don't know if I want to be that close to you. We'll hang out occasionally, but I don't really want to have that much contact with you because I don't like you that much, or I don't prioritize, I have other people that are much closer to me and you're just sort of a peripheral. Yeah, that would be hurtful if you define the relationship differently. But there's a possibility that your friend was just saying, look, I want to be friends, but I'm not a texter, so let's not chat or text. Let's meet up, but don't expect me to text back or to feel compelled to text back. And we've had this history now with texting that feels kind of awkward. So I don't know. Let's just put that aside. So I don't know which one it was, Cassie. Was it your friend pushing you away, or is it your friend just asserting something and hey, I this is the way I would like our relationship to be. But then you send 2 messages afterwards. I just can't imagine that being a good call under any circumstance. Even if your friend was being a jerk face, they specifically said, the way that you said it, it's not good for either of us to keep messaging each other, so let's stop. So, if I were a little birdie on your shoulder, I'd be like, don't send those messages, call, or, send a snail mail or something, but goddamn, don't text, because this is, even if your friend is okay with texting, this could feel like an aggression on some level, because it's defying what she was asking for, I think, if I'm reading into it right. Anyway, so I sent, and it sounds like, Cassie, for you, this is generated from preoccupied attachment. It's sounding that way to me. I can't know, but, just from what I'm reading so far, because for preoccupied folks, they're much more likely to be frequent texters because they need that reassurance, which is fine, but it can result in these kinds of conflicts. And I'm guessing what happened is it hurt your feelings. Maybe at first you're like, okay, we can be friends, but just not text. Okay. But then as the days progressed, you started to be more worried because it was triggering something in you. And then that worry was mounting, and maybe anger was mounting, and you can't take it. And so you send these texts, even though there was a part of you that was saying, don't do that, but you were panicking. I don't know, but it's possible. Or you just thought that the texts would be taken more as an overt communication. Maybe you interpreted the messaging with each other as being something like, well, let's not do frivolous texting, but if there's sort of an intense need for a text, like let's schedule something or a confession of some kind. But, here's just a general guideline. And, I'm old, so this is a product of that. But when it comes to important communication, emotional communication, intense communication like this, don't do it over text or email. 90% of the data is lost because there's no nonverbals, unless you're really good with emojis, which some people are. But even then, it's just not enough. Imagine having parents that only text you. That would be awful, right? We understand that we need human contact and facial expressions and voice inflection, So that if I was a birdie on your shoulder, I would also tell you, wait to have, there's a lot on the line right here. So have a in-person conversation. I sent 2 messages afterwards confessing some of my feelings. I also asked for clarification regarding what she meant by not messaging at all, despite us being good friends. Again, I want to remind you, Cassie, you're texting asking why she said don't text. You say, can I still send her birthday messages, for example? Oh, so you're saying, is it okay for me to send you birthday messages? Again, it's hard to know how she was receiving this. She could have even received this as hostile, but I don't know. Even though verbatim you weren't being hostile, but it could maybe come across that way. And then you say, but I got no reply. Yeah, well, she's probably saying, well, I told her what the deal is, and she's still texting me. So recently I sent an email telling her how hurt I was by this. I guess I was stupidly hoping for a reconciliation. However, she ended up blocking me on Messenger and Instagram. Okay, well, blocking, that's pretty severe. Yeah. So up until this point in your email, I still don't know what she was intending or what was going on with her. I don't have enough data, of course, but I think there's a pretty good possibility that there was a way to salvage this. Like, in the beginning, when you first started, you say in the beginning of the email, I always thought our relationship was good. I thought our friendship was good, even though she is generally a bad texter. I don't know what you mean by that, Cassie. You might be like, she's kind of a bad texter, just kind of casually saying that. But you could also be saying that like, she's a bad texter and therefore a bad friend, where for her, she might just have a completely different approach to texting frequency, And so it's possible that the two of you had closeness and a lot of potential at that point. And because of, maybe your preoccupation and or their avoidance, because there takes two to tango, so that you could be triggering each other. It has that classic look to me, by the way, but I can't know, obviously. Going on with the email, I've previously been watching advice being given by dating coaches. I've been watching advice given by dating coaches where they say you shouldn't reach out to an ex until a month later. Otherwise, there will be no chance of getting them back. That's just chiming in. That's ridiculous. To all 8 billion people on the planet, this is what always is going to work. No, there's plus, there's so many things that we could talk about. One, if someone breaks up with you, there's not a high likelihood of getting them back no matter what you do, because they broke up with you. Because this implies that the person wondering, should I text, wants the person back. So that presumes that the person you're texting broke up with you. Yeah. Anyway, so dating coaches are saying you shouldn't reach out to an ex until a month later. Otherwise, there will be no chance of getting. These are why dating. Okay, God bless life coaches and dating coaches and online experts on whatever, but and there are good ones out there for sure, but there are some fucking idiots out there as well, and this is an idiotic thing to say. To every single plus, like, what a dating coach should be saying is, look, 99% of you should be grieving and trying to move on instead of pining, because, pining is normal and that's going to happen. But strategizing on how you're going to get someone back that is extremely unlikely to get back. And there's a good possibility the person that left you is leaving you because you treat them like shit because you're always scheming on how to control them. Anyway. Going on. However, because this is not a romantic relationship, the friendship that Cassie's talking about, and this wasn't really a breakup, well, kind of sounds like a bit of a breakup, I thought the rules would be applied differently. I'm worried that I have ruined my chances of reconciliation because I reached out too soon and messaged. I think the fact that you messaged her at all, messaged, what did I say? The fact that you messaged her at all, Cassie, I think is the problem. I think, but even then, I don't even imagine it's the texting. It was the emotional content as you were communicating about the texting. I'm guessing it had nothing to do with the texting. It had everything to do with the vibe that she was getting from you. Now, there's a good possibility that she has the other side to this coin, in that instead of coming to there could have been a time when early in this process where she was like, I really like Cassie as my friend, but I feel like sometimes she's angry at me for weird reasons, and she seems like she's anxiously texting me all day long, and I want to have this relationship and I want it to be different, but I don't trust in other people because of my past, so I'm just going to avoid the whole thing. Meanwhile, I'm getting more and more angry and upset. So, there could be a whole other side to this that she's responsible for, and the two of you just triggered each other. I think there's a good chance of that. The last bit of advice is whatever dating coaches you're referring to, stop paying attention to them because that's some real stupid shit that I'm hearing. But to address your main question about whether or not there's a chance for reconciliation, yeah, absolutely. Like, there's so many different paths, but one, I would never text her again unless there's an emergency, like there's a forest fire by her house and you just need to tell her there's a forest fire by her house. I would just abnormally avoid texting because you want to prove that you hear her request. So stop with the texting. Call. There's nothing I'm hearing that she is against calling. I wouldn't call every day, but, calling. There's a good chance that since you were good friends or good enough in the beginning of this, that there is something compatible there if you just understand each other and you understand yourselves. And it might be too far down the road. I mean, since she blocked you, hopefully you're in therapy, Cassie. I'm guessing that you are. Most of my listeners tend to be in therapy. So I would explore it there, and then you would get some specific guidance and ideas about what's happening with you in this situation. But you could even have your friend listen to this whole segment of this podcast. If you think that I'm close, and you could, if it is close, you could be like, hey, I sent in our situation to this random podcast and he basically called me out on my shit, and I just want to apologize. And it's a way of acknowledging. You can listen to this segment of this podcast, and he's basically describing what was going on with. But Cassie, I don't know if that's even true. If it's something else, I'm the sort of person that I just believe that if you can just really understand each other, if we can just understand each other, then things tend to work out. So if there was a way to, but first you have to understand yourself, Cassie, right? You can't just approach it like you're a bad texter and that needs to change or whatever. That's not really understanding what you brought to the table. And so if you understand what you brought to the table, and thus you're remorseful and sorry for what you did based on your past, right? It's not your fault that you have this alleged insecurity. I say alleged because I don't know. I'm alleging, based on very little information, but, and if you were somehow able to download that, obviously it's not over text or email. So you could record like a 5-minute little thing. Don't make it too long. You could call them, leave a voicemail. Again, don't make it too long. You could ask just to meet up for 5 minutes. I don't know if that would happen given that they blocked you. At the very least, there could be opportunity for closure there. And also, most importantly, really, Cassie, if there's some issue going on with you, this is a wonderful opportunity for you to investigate, get awareness, and heal such that the next time this happens, because I'm guessing it will be triggered again, then you're less likely to engage in a pattern with that person that will result in a similar outcome. All right, let's take a break. All right, we're back from the break. Let's do another OPP, another old patron praise. These are patrons that go all the way back to 2017. These are regular patrons. We have Nari from Seattle. I know of that town. We got Julia from San Francisco. We have Michelle from Durham, North Carolina. Karen from Pasadena, Maryland. We have Rashama from New York, New York. Christina from Rensselaer, New York. LG from Round Rock, Texas. James from Reservoir, Australia. Justin, good old Justin, I know Justin, from Cedro Woolley, Washington. We got Belle from Great Britain. We have Laura from Fort Worth, Texas, Catherine from Hillsborough, New Jersey, and Jennifer from Evanston, Illinois. Thank you for becoming a patron and staying a patron all the way from 2017. And by the way, I got all the way through all the patrons who signed up in 2021 and are still patrons. And I was going to, go to 2022 patrons, but it had been so long since I'd gone to the beginning that I wanted to go back to the beginning to just highlight some of those folks that became patrons way back when, because there's not a lot of people who have been patrons since the very beginning. So it won't take me long. And then eventually I'll get to 2022. All right, let's open the Google Doc in which Stacy puts all the emails from the middle tier patrons and people who are also patrons and YouTube members. We have long-term middle tier patron and YouTube member Lauren from Olympia. So Lauren is a long-term middle tier patron and also a YouTube member. And she's from Olympia, the capital of my state. She says, I just watched Truth versus Alex Jones on Max. So it sounds like a documentary called Truth versus Alex Jones. Sounds like a very interesting watch. I would be interested in hearing your reactions to it. The people who follow Alex Jones seem to have a lot of behaviors in common with quote unquote Karens. I was wondering if you thought there were psychological similarities. Interested in your thoughts. Okay, well, yeah, I'll add that to the list. I mean, just for my own enjoyment. I'll copy and paste this into my little to-do list. Truth versus Alex Jones. Yeah, I mean, I don't follow the Alex Jones story closely, but I have been following enough. We did a mini deep dive, me and Berto, into Alex Jones years ago. So it was interesting to see all that happen. And yeah, I mean, I'm just so glad that he was sued severely. As of today, I'm recording this in late June. I've seen clips where he's like crying on his podcast because he's running out of money. And I don't even know if that's true, but I don't even know why legally he's allowed to have a microphone anymore personally, but going on. Patron and YouTube member Riso, she says, I was recently rewatching The Office. Have you seen the show? Chiming in here, well, patron and YouTube member Riso, have I seen The Office? Yes, I watched from the very first episode. I also love the British Office, of course, and the American Office is a very different ball of wax. It became much more of like a drama soap opera kind of thing in a good way, where the people's lives, we got to know these people really well. I've listened to the podcast with Pam and Angela, their characters. They have real names, which I forget, but they have a podcast. I've also watched a video in which Billie Eilish is a huge Office fan, and she goes on to a video with Rainn Wilson, a local hero here in Seattle, and Rainn Wilson, who plays Dwight, right, asks a lot of Office trivia questions to Billie Eilish, and Billie Eilish did really well. I mean, I didn't know the answers to most of it because, real obscure details. But yeah, I frequently will rewatch episodes. I've seen it all the way through once, and I've probably seen a third of the whole run again. I have dreams of getting because when my wife and I sit down to watch TV, we tend to just start where we left off, with like House of the Dragon, or for a while we watched Superstore. The first couple seasons were really delightful. It got a little not so great. I mean, not terrible, but so it's like maybe we could start watching The Office, Anyway, from what I learned in your deep dives, Michael Scott seems to suffer from histrionic personality disorder. Histrionic. I find that they depict his lack of self very well. His lack of self, lack of connection with self. It's always hard to analyze characters on shows like this because there's a lot of health with Michael Scott. I don't know if this is true, but I imagine if you truly depicted someone with a personality disorder, they wouldn't be as likable. Michael Scott, at the end of the day, especially as the seasons progressed, he was very healthy, very altruistic, very compassionate, possibly the most compassionate, caring character on the entire show. Not that people with histrionic can't be caring, of course, but to have that inner resource and that availability and that attunement means that you have enough internal resources and you feel secure enough to even pay attention and to give to other people. Does he have problems? Yeah, but I think that's the way that you have to write these comedic characters, is that they have these exaggerated flaws because I think that's why we watch shows like this, why cringe humor works on us, is because, like Curb, is that they're exaggerations of what we've done. To watch Michael Scott be insecure or to put his foot in his mouth, we're like, oh my God, I've done that, or I've wondered if I've done that, or I worry about doing that. And if you write it well enough, it just works on people. It's hilarious and compelling to watch because of that reason and other reasons. But in order for a character like that to be written as well as that character is written on The Office, they have to be likable and relatable, and the problems that they exhibit are just exaggerations of things that we do. And you could argue that histrionic is, and that's the way that it's often described, even by me, personality disorders, is that it's an exaggerated defense or trait or schema that we all have to some extent. We all are borderline and narcissistic and histrionic. We all have those minor tendencies. It's just a matter of when it gets exaggerated, then these things happen. But Michael Scott and histrionic, histrionic is a thing. And yeah, like his comedy, if you in quotes, and he has histrionic traits for sure. He really, and that's why narcissism is considered a close cousin and some overlap with histrionic, in that he really believes, particularly early in the run, he really believes that he's hilarious and that he's a genius and he's the best boss, and that no one is laughing at him. He thinks everyone is agreeing with what's in his mind. So you could almost say it's more narcissistic in a way. Anyway, for example, he goes from feeling like he is nothing to that. Oh, right. So you're saying that he lacks a connection with the self. All the personality disorders, generally speaking, lack a connection with the self. And you can lack a connection with the self and not have a personality disorder. So just your evidence that he lacks self is one indication of a personality disorder like histrionic, but it's not like the central feature. I'm very curious to know if you have watched the show and if you feel that it is a somewhat accurate depiction of the disorder or not at all. I'm sending you lots of love and appreciation. You really made a beautiful impact on my life. Hugs, Riso. Oh. Well, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name right. It looks like Riso to me. Well, that's very sweet of you. So yeah, I don't know. It would take me a while. I would have to watch the whole run again. And so those are just off the top of my head. All right. Next email is from anonymous long-term patron. She says, "Hi, Kirk. Long-time listener here. Just suggesting you react to some songs by 21 Pilots, because it is majorly mental health related and they have a new album releasing soon. If you're interested, hit me up for where to start." Well, anonymous long-term patron. And some of you might be asking, well, how would I know how to hit her up to get, well, in the form on the website, they will include their name and their email address. But I ask, how would you like me to refer to you? And she said anonymous long-term patron. So recently I finally got to what a lot of people wanted me to do, which was to react to a song by, I can't even remember his name now. It's on YouTube, and also Kendrick Lamar, but the other guy. Anyway, Hi Ren by Ren. People have been asking me to react to that song for at least a couple of years, and I finally got around to it. And what I found was that reacting to songs on the air creates this huge problem with copyright. Like I recorded a long time for the high rend stuff. I managed to, because sometimes it has to do with the length of the clip. Now, of course, fair use, legally wise, I could listen to the whole song and react, and that's fair use. That's pretty clearly established in case law and in law. But when it comes to podcasts and YouTube, they often will just try to play it safe. And sure, I could refute it. I could get lawyers and fight all those things, but it could take literally years to work that kind of shit out. And it's just not worth it. So when it came to the Ren song, I was able to, because I would upload it and then I would get this copyright issue. And there's different levels to it. Like sometimes I'll say that, like at the top level, it'll be a strike where it's literally heading towards you having your whole channel deleted, which is just like horrific to think about. But they can also say that your video is unwatchable, meaning that it cannot be seen by anyone. It's banned essentially. It's on your channel. You can watch it because it's your channel, but no one else can. So there's that level. There's also the level where they'll publish it, but only in some countries, and it can be kind of weird, like which countries will be where it'll be available sometimes. So sometimes if that ever happens to you, where you click on something and if you're in Germany or something, sometimes they'll just ban a video from Germany. And I understand why. Anyway, not Germany in particular, but a particular region of the world. Anyway. Or they'll say, yeah, we'll publish it, but we'll take all the money, whatever sort of publishing companies, they'll take all the revenue, which is fine with me. It doesn't usually matter to me. Or we'll share the revenue, or, so there's different reactions from YouTube and also from podcasts, platforms like Spotify and this kind of thing. And yeah, a peek behind the curtain is a huge task for psychology in Seattle dealing with this shit. On one level, it's a major pain in the ass. On another level, it's just like, well, if I'm going to have this kind of content, then I just have to accept it. And, so when I watch a show like 90 Day Fiancé or Love is Blind, I pretty quickly realize the parameters that these companies are following, and they are generally always the same. They share a lot of the same parameters. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure that each company can dial in what they want. Like, for example, with the Ren song, I could play clips that were 7 seconds max or something. And it makes it annoying, because I'll listen to a whole stanza and it could be like 11 seconds. And then I react, I pause the song and I react to that stanza. But then when I upload it, it gets taken down. So I have to, edit and upload again and then find that's not good enough. And I have to keep making the clips shorter and shorter. And it makes the content nonsensical sometimes, because unless you know the song well, or you're following along on some lyric public, some website that has the lyrics or something, then you'll hear the end of a stanza and then you'll hear me react to the beginning of the stanza, but you didn't hear it if you're watching the video or listening to the episode. Does this make sense? So it can be really annoying. And this can happen when I'm watching Love is Blind too. I'll watch 30 seconds, pause, and say something. And I'm referring to things that happened at the beginning of the 30 seconds. But when I go back and edit it, I have to say, oh, crap, what do I do? Sometimes I'll be able to edit that 30 seconds into 15 seconds, which is generally accepted. But it can make it real choppy. And other times I just have to make do with what I got. And, if you ever see problems along those lines, it's because of this. And so when I do react to, say, a reality TV show, I try not to wait too long to chime in. Some of you will even yell at me for chiming in too soon. You'd be like, Kirk, you got to wait for them to finish. Well, a possible factor might be that if I wait too long, the clip will be too long and I won't be able to publish anything, and it'll be confusing to people. So I have this like internal clock, because I'm not watching the clock. I don't even know what clock I would really be watching, but I have this internal sense of like, okay, it's probably about 15 seconds, so I better chime in here at some and say, and plus, this is just me just yammering about this topic, but it's a big part of my life. If I stop it after 15 seconds, but I only talk for 10 seconds and then start it up again, the algorithm will think that my 10 seconds of talking is part of the clip. And so it'll take both clips, say I have 15 seconds of show, 10 seconds of me talking, and then 15 seconds of the show. The computer, because it's not a human being that goes through all this shit, the computer will identify all 40 seconds as being from the show, and thus it's a copyright problem. So I have to talk for long enough, and it gets really fucking weird because I just want to be able to react spontaneously, but it won't work in the edit if I don't mind these particular details. Now, I've been doing reaction videos for over 4 years now, and have done literally thousands, so it's not hard for me to do, but it's a thing. So when I watched the Ren song, so I spent a day and I watched all 3 songs, the Ren song and the 2 Kendrick Lamar songs, and people had requested these. And I uploaded all 3 and got copyright on all 3 of them, take them down, edit, upload, still a problem. I finally get to a place with the Ren song where it's good, but they're pretty short clips at times, which is unfortunate. But with the Kendrick Lamar songs, they wouldn't allow even 1 second of the song. So I had to take out all of the music in a video in which I'm reacting to music. So those videos that I spent a lot of time on, not only recording, but editing, it was a major bummer. And because I'd never really done that before. I'd never really react. So this is all going back to your request, Anonymous Long-Term Patron, for me to react to 21 Pilots music. I can't take that risk because you never know what's going to happen until you upload it. So if you're uploading it, you've already recorded, you've already edited. Stacy has already reviewed the thing, and there's a thumbnail and a description, and it's a lot of tedious background tasks that it's super time consuming. And when it's worth it, it's worth it. But when you get to the end of the road and you have to basically dumb your episode down to this ridiculous, the metaphor I have in my mind is when, you keep, you're a kid and you're trying to draw a perfect circle and you're trying to cut a perfect circle and you're just going further and further in. And by the time you're done with this quote unquote circle, you have this like tiny dot of a piece of paper. It's like that. You're getting rid of all the substance and the entertainment value and the interest and the whole core of these Kendrick Lamar. And these episodes were so good not what I was saying, but like playing these clips, rewinding. I was like, oh, let's listen to that line again, and hearing Kendrick say it again. And I just had to take all of that out. So what I'm going to do right now, Anonymous Long-Term, because you're a long-term patron, I'm going to pause this episode. I'm going to listen to some 21 Pilots, and then I'll tell you what I think. All right, I listened to a few of the most popular songs that are listed on Spotify: Stressed Out, Ride, Heathens. I liked Heathens. It had a pretty good groove. It has I don't know if it's like I don't know all the different key names, like Ionian, or I don't know. There's a particular kind of key that I like to write in as well. It's one of the minors. Anyway, forgetting my theory, and it had that kind of feel to it. But yeah, I was also looking at the lyrics, and it's interesting. I didn't get a chance to listen to all the stuff, but like their most popular song on Spotify anyway, "Stressed Out." Wish I could turn back time to the good old days when our mama sang us to sleep, but now we're stressed out. Wish I could turn back time to the good old days when our mama sang us to sleep. And I actually wrote a similar themed song. The song I wrote was terrible because, well, the song is what it is, I guess. I wrote it when I was in high school. I was 16, and I wrote a song. I wish I were 10 again. Is the name of the song. I wish, well, I mean, we can listen to that because there's no copyright there. Yeah. So the lyrics, what was it? When I was a young boy, never cared about a thing. I think I was about 10. Yeah. So, that kind of thinking, and there's a lot of philosophy and research around this nostalgia. And is it true that things were so much better back then, or do we only just remember the good times? There's a lot of cognitive biases at play. But anyway, and listen, I haven't heard that recording in a long time, and I had just I just bought a drum machine, an Alesis drum machine. I didn't know anything about anything. And I didn't even know how I identified this Alesis drum machine as the one I should get. I probably just went into a music store in Seattle and just asked them, and they said that the Alesis was the way to go. It was like $400, and I bought a used one, I think, a newspaper classified ad, and they sold it for a little cheaper. And I remember I went to Bellevue Square and met this like old guy, and I bought this Alesis drum machine. I also had my 4-track recorder. Each of these units cost like $400, and I remember I spent so much of my saved work money on these things, but man, it was a game changer. But you can hear that, I don't know if you can hear, but I don't have a bass, so I'm playing my guitar as if it were a bass, which isn't really great. And also my drum machine, I didn't have any guidance on how to program drums, and I am programming those drums just intuitively, and there's some kind of odd choices that I made drum-wise back then. Also, I have no vocal processing, and I don't have any sort of compression or reverb or anything. And I also have this really shitty microphone that Peavey made that was like an SM58 knockoff. Anyway, it's just funny to hear that stuff. But yeah, 21 Pilots, that Heathen song, I could see myself listening to. Okay, let's go on to another email. All right, this next email is from middle tier patron Emily from Denver. She had a lot of questions, but I'll just highlight one that I can answer here, which is, she says, do you often see people with ADHD develop similar schemas to one another? And off the top of my head, I would say absolutely. It's not universal, of course, but for those folks who, as children, suffered from ADHD and were not properly diagnosed and or treated, and even if you are properly diagnosed and treated, there's still a chance that you'll develop this schema, because these children are treated in the way. So how do I explain this? For those of you that have ADHD or experts out there, you know all this stuff, so I'm not going to say anything mind-blowing, but when kids, regardless of ADHD, if you have a kid who isn't paying attention, or if you have a kid who doesn't complete a task well, that the authorities, whether it's parents or teachers or older siblings or whatever, when they believe that a child should be able to complete these things and the child doesn't do these things, then there can be this assumption that the child is either choosing to defy the rules or the child is choosing to not pay attention. And a lot of times that's true. And so the authorities, parents, teachers, will crack down on that. Hopefully not in an abusive way, but they'll draw attention to it. They'll be like, hey, remember I told you to clean your room, and I only see that you picked up those 3 toys, but there's still 15 other toys. What's going on here? Again, even if you're being nice about it, you're going to point it out. For kids with ADHD, due to their differences, it can be really hard, if not impossible, for them to retain all of that in their working memory such that they can complete all of the tasks. They'll get to 3 toys and then it'll just be gone from their working memory because you're not in front of them reminding them, and they don't even remember that that's what they were doing. They're not like dissociative, but they're much more likely to have that kind of experience and thus get off track or be distracted by something else. There's a lot of different experiences and differences with people with ADHD. Anyway, so when you have an authority structure and a system that reacts to kids, let's say, kids without ADHD or anxiety or some other issue that can get in the way of that, things tend to work out. Like when I was a kid and I was getting off track and someone said, "Hey, stay on track," again, in a nice way, it helps me. So, oh yeah, that's right. And then I learned over time to internalize that superego such that I didn't need someone to remind me and I could stay on track. It was helpful advice, helpful for people to point that out, and maybe even sometimes to discipline me in some ways. So for me, since I was being treated in a way that gave me the opportunity to grow at my learning edge, then the overall experience for me was one of growth and learning, but without feeling like I'm a dumbass. You know what I mean? Like along those lines, I think I do have a mild case of dyslexia, and I didn't know it until rather recently. And when I was kindergarten to 5th grade, the majority of the sense of how good of a student you were was based on how well you could read out loud in class and how fast you could read something and answer questions. Math wasn't the focus when you're in the 3rd grade. It's all spelling and writing and reading. And because of what I believe to be my mild dyslexia, I was not good. I was one of the worst students. I was always we would do spelling bees, and I was always one of the first students to lose and sit down. We'd all stand up in front of class, go one by one, and okay, spell this word. And I was always one of the first people to crap out and have to sit down, and sort of humiliating sitting in the you're just waiting for because the good spellers, it might take them hours to be eliminated. So I thought of myself as a dummy, and it took a while for me to have other evidence to demonstrate to me that I wasn't a dummy. And I still kind of have that thing inside of me. One could say that, this is interesting to think about. I mean, I've thought about this before from a different angle, but one could argue that me being a professor and maybe even being a therapist, but particularly being a podcaster, and the fact that I get triggered by comments sometimes has to do with this schema that I'm stupid. And if I can only get out ahead of it by making content that can demonstrate that I'm not stupid, then maybe I can feel better about myself and sleep at night, Now, there are ways of dealing with schemas in a non-destructive way. I hope I'm doing that, but there are times when it can be very destructive, at least to me and to other people. So similarly, with kids with ADHD, a very common experience is that they're trying in as much as all the other kids are trying, and it's normal for even non-ADHD kids to get in trouble sometimes. But overall, the non-ADHD kids, manage. But for the ADHD kids, they're getting in trouble 10 times as more. And trouble is a strong word. Sometimes it can be just trouble, but it could be mildly pointed out, right? You just have a teacher say, hey, stand track, or a parent. It's like, hey, remember, we're trying to pick up all our toys. And you start to believe, again, even if you are being treated and diagnosed, you can start to have this sense of there's something different about you, and that you're lazy, or you're stupid, or your brain is broken, or you are frivolous, or if you talk too much, then you talk too much, or you're a bad kid, like you're defiant, if you're treated in that way, or you just start to develop that sense like I don't follow the rules. That must be who I am. How do I deal with that? Well, when it comes to schema therapy, the model, and I find this to be quite true, there are 3 different styles of coping with these destructive ideas about ourselves and the world. One is to surrender, another is to avoid it, another is to overcompensate. And not everyone with ADHD has this schema, but everybody with ADHD that I've treated has had this in spades, like a lot. They've had it a lot. It's their primary trauma, really, for a lot of these people. And the way to surrender to the schema is to say, yep, I'm stupid, or I'm incompetent, or I'm defiant, and fuck it, there's no use trying to change that. I'll just lean into it. And I will publicly identify and internally identify as a lazy, stupid, incompetent, fill in the blank, whatever word that they have. And there's no sense trying to change it. There's no sense trying to correct for it. And I need someone to hold my hand, to walk me through. I'm not even going to try. Even with adults that have gone through a ton of therapy and are being diagnosed, they might be taking medications, they could still have these effects that'll creep up for them. The avoidance to this schema is to avoid any task that requires paying attention and or remembering various different tasks. So this individual might not leave the house much because they don't want to be reprimanded or make a mistake in the outside world. They might pick very easy occupations, maybe in a healthy way, but also maybe in a way that really limits them artificially. They might avoid relationships because they have learned that they will disappoint someone. Because that's the other aspect to ADHD, of course, is that it's not just in school. That's often what we focus on because we're like a hyper-focused society on schooling, because it has to do with like capitalism and making people into productive workers. But of course, there's relationships, and ADHD doesn't stop when you leave school. It affects the way that you interact with people and how much you can pay attention, how well you can remember things in the moment, your emotional control. You have a general deficit in your executive function and your working memory, such that when you have an impulse or an emotional feeling, it can be harder to rein that in and to modulate it, or to self-soothe, or to reframe it in your mind, because the executive function has a harder time kicking in. And even if you're trying to have it kick in, it can be hard for it to exert its control over the limbic system. Anyway, so you can have all these ideas about you're too emotional, or you're histrionic or narcissistic, or anyway. So that can affect your relationships, and thus you can have someone that's avoiding any kind of relationships. They might avoid emotions, this kind of thing. And then you have the overcompensation, where the individual might say, I am going to prove to myself and other people that not only am I smart and capable and good with emotions, or whatever, fill in the blank, that I'm going to go full hog into that, and I will not accept any result other than perfection for myself and other people. I need to make sure everyone understands that I'm perfect in this, and when I do make a mistake, I'm going to blame everyone else, because God forbid that I acknowledge that I have this issue, or they might over-medicate potentially. They might develop weird coping skills to offset the amount of rigor that they have to put into their various different activities. I'm just speaking off the top of my head, but yeah, Emily from Denver, that this is my experience with adults who have ADHD, a very, very common schema. Now, I will say that I have talked to some adults with ADHD who were properly identified enough early enough and were treated well enough and had good enough therapists and good enough parents such that the adult with ADHD as an adult has minimal or zero evidence of this schema or any other schema, which really shows that when people have proper education, and the system, the school, and the parents and friends and whatnot, your friends' parents, because you might spend the night at your friends, that everyone understands, then there's no ill effects. It's just like, oh, you just have a neuro difference. It's fine, and moving on in life, no big deal. It's not the end of the world. A lot of the ill effects of ADHD for adults has to do with the way they're treated and has nothing to do with their neuro difference. Like one example is for some adults with ADHD, they can, like if you have a partner that has ADHD, you might find that they don't listen very well when you have more. Like I have a friend who is like this, and I know under most circumstances, if I have a sentence that I'm going to tell him, I need to say it as quickly as possible. I need to summarize all my thoughts into one sentence. Otherwise, I'm going to lose him. And some of you might be thinking, well, Kirk, you yammer, and sure. But sometimes I'm even just trying to say a phrase because I can just see his brain just starting to lose focus, and he's just glazing over or being distracted by something. And he's a good friend, but I just know that I have to be really quick. And for some of these folks, it's not because of their ADHD that this is happening. I mean, obviously it could be, but another factor is that when they were growing up and they continually were being, or occasionally, but enough of the time, they were being yelled at or disciplined, or they were getting indications that they were hurting other people's feelings because they were distracted and they weren't as good as a listener as other people were hoping that they would be. They develop a complex around listening such that when they're an adult and they do have the capacity to pay attention to their friend as they have 3 sentences to say, because of their fear of hurting other people's feelings, they have this spike in anxiety and maybe even mild PTSD because, oh shit, we're hitting into a zone where I'm being talked at for 3 sentences. This usually goes bad for me. And then you're flooded or you just have this stance of just like, I better get out of this, 3 sentences as fast as I can because I'm going to bother someone. And then, you can't, or you signal to the other person that, look, you shouldn't be talking to me, even though in that moment they did have the capacity to hear 3 sentences. They're like, I don't want to give the impression that I can listen to more than 1 sentence because I know that at some point I'm going to disappoint people and I don't want to hurt other people's feelings because I want to retain my relationships. There can be these layers upon layers upon layers of trauma that people with ADHD go through that I experience. But it gives me great hope for the future that there are adults that I've met that don't have these complexes because of what we have done in my profession and in our society to raise awareness and give people the tools, mainly the parents and the teachers, that will help. So, yeah. All right. Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.